Good morning, Teachers on Fire. I hope you're doing well on this weekend. I don't know about you, but here in these parts, we've just completed our first week of school of the school year. So I hope you are feeling good. I hope you are feeling still on fire for teaching. You're excited about the year. You're feeling positive about what's ahead. It certainly is a busy season. And I'm hoping that in the next few minutes, as we talk about some of the teacher news and views from around social media, that might help in some way to warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your professional practice. What I'd like to do with this slot is jump into some of the very best posts that I've noticed on X across the week and even on some other social media platforms, although that's not going to show up in today's show. But I really want to collect some of the best conversations that perhaps you haven't had a chance to be a part of and just highlight some of the thought-provoking questions and feedback from other teachers. So I'm going to start with Susan Barber here on X. Let's see if I can bring that up properly. It looks like I am sharing the correct tab, so please jump in and let me know if I am not at any time. But I want to start out with this question. Oh, and it looks like I am not doing that properly yet. There we go. Okay, so again, I'm a little bit rusty on some of the live streaming features here, but I want to start with this question from Susan Barber. Let me get this set up properly and see if I can do a little zooming in here. She says, education is hard these days. Why do you keep returning to the classroom? So that's a question for you, my friend. Why do you keep returning to the classroom? I was a little bit anxious thinking about this feed and some of the results that would follow, but I was pleasantly surprised as I dug in that there is a good mix, that it's yes, there is some negativity, but there's also some positivity and some inspiration. So let's take a look at some of the responses that followed. Sean Capola says, I had to take a 4-year break because it was quite literally killing me. Oh no. Now I'm back part-time and it's wonderful, but I also feel like I'm drowning. So it's wonderful, but she feels like she's drowning at the same time. I think that is an experience that many teachers can relate to, unfortunately, perhaps. But I'm glad that in her case, Shauna says she is working part-time, and that's been a nice change for some of my colleagues, some of my friends who have downgraded their percentage a little bit. Of course, my fear is always that once you move to 80%, you're sort of doing 90% work with 80% paid time. So that's something to keep in mind. Feels like you're always doing a little bit more than whatever is your contractual obligations require. Jason says, because I'm so close to retirement that it would be foolish to leave at this point. So I work to ignore the politics and unfortunate district admin decisions and try to focus on the magic that happens in my classroom. I like that. I don't like that, Jason, you feel stuck because you're close to retirement, but I do like the fact that you haven't lost sight of the magic, as you put it, that happens in classrooms. And I agree, it's there for us every day if we're willing to look for it, if we're willing to invest in kids. Sarah Beaudry says, a student stopped me in a different part of campus today to tell me he liked yesterday's short story so much. It's the first time he's ever chosen to reread for fun at home. That really made me smile as a longtime English teacher as well. Love that idea. And so, Sarah, more power to you and keep that learning going. I love that. So I'm guessing a middle schooler. I'm guessing this is a middle schooler went home and reread the short story that he read in class. That is awesome. Jeremy says, Kids Day CM says, we can't bail on the kids. No way they can fix this world if they don't know how. Emily says, real talk. I tried to find another job and couldn't get hired anywhere. Also, the pay where I live isn't horrible and the hours are good. So I have sort of mixed thoughts about this comment, this post, but I like the idea of focusing with gratitude on what we do have. And yeah, sometimes if the compensation isn't so bad and your quality of life is not so bad, you really have to think carefully about, is this the worst scenario, really? Sometimes we get a little down on ourselves, maybe tired, but it helps to be grateful for the great things that we do have. Joe Ferraro says, the chance to meet, impact, and be impacted by amazing people like our students and professionals like you. And he's got a podcast called the 1% Better Podcast. It's been a while since I've tuned in, but that's one worth listening to. Thoughts entering year 25 in the classroom. Congratulations to you. This is my year 23. The school doc says education is complicated because the K-12 system has made it so. The only way to fix it is if teachers stand up for themselves and unite. But for some reason, teachers would rather hide in their classrooms, ouch, and wish the pain and suffering away. That's not how it works. Well, a bit of a harsh tone or a bit of a harsh critique there, school doc, but I will say I agree with you that if things are not as they should be, and this is one theme that came out over and over again when I was interviewing educators on the podcast, you need to do something about it. You can't just sit there in misery year after year. You do have options. And for many teachers, it simply means moving from their current school or district somewhere else. Let's hear one or two more comments. Again, the question is, why are you returning to the classroom? That question was brought forward by Susan Barber. Crystal says, I'm grateful that I was able to share my teacher burnout story on Anxious Achiever, on the Anxious Achiever podcast. All right. So that's one that I am not familiar with. And it says LinkedIn. It's a LinkedIn podcast. Okay. Very cool. And the mad woman in the classroom says, I don't have any other marketable skills, Susan. And I know a lot of teachers do feel that way. I actually have more faith in educators than I think as many do in themselves. I think you're not relegated to serving tables or stocking shelves once you leave the classroom. There are many other related fields available, but yes, I don't have any other marketable skills. So we know that thought is out there. Maybe before we leave this feed, let's make sure we end on a positive note. Activist History Teach says, the kids are great despite having tough backgrounds. I love having former students come back and show how successful they have become. Love that from Activist History Teach. Okay, so again, great question. Scrolling back to the top from Susan Barber, why do you keep returning to the classroom? If you're watching on the replay, let me know in the comments, why do you keep returning to the classroom? I think that's a key question. Over to Matthew K. Over for our next question. I'm just going to check in on the broadcast and maybe see if I can change the nature of my screen here. Again, it's been quite a while since I've been here on StreamYard. Quite like it. I think I will stick with this one for now, although that makes the screen a little on the small side, but let's try it out. Okay, Matthew K. I'm going to zoom in here on his comment. He says, parenthood has caused my perspective on homework to shift dramatically. Like y'all had 8 hours with my kid. Y'all couldn't find all the work in there. I only got 3-ish hours between home and bedtime. That's our time. You'll see them tomorrow. So I have a few thoughts on this, Matthew. First of all, I like what you're saying about we only have 3-ish hours at home with our children. Between school and bedtime, whatever bedtime happens to be, let's say it's 3-4 hours. That's not a long window. And yes, we know that teachers in many cases actually have more time with your children than you as parents do. So that is a reality. What about this business with homework? Well, let me speak to this from a longtime middle school perspective. I've taught a little bit of high school as well. So in our middle school, we got into the habit of not assigning home-only work. Home-only work, meaning that any homework that a student had was simply learning activities that were not completed during the school day. And so students shouldn't be overwhelmed by homework, in my view. And I'm not really a big fan, again, as I said, of assigning home only work. Like, we're at the end of the class, the bell's gone, now read the next chapter or something like that. I'm not a big fan of that. But I do think that the idea of students finishing a learning activity that was begun in class during class time and then finishing that on their own time, I don't think that is a bad idea. And it gives a little bit of accountability and a little bit of the message of you're owning your learning. This is a learning activity that I consider important, integral to the learning in the unit. And it's something that you shouldn't just skate on by and skip. And I'm just anxious when some of the advocates for a really hard zero homework kind of a rule get to speaking about that. I'm just anxious that now we're talking about students in the middle years, in the high school years, getting the message that anything they don't finish in the class during the class time, they now have sort of a get out of jail. That's a terrible analogy, but they sort of get a free pass on those learning activities. And no, I'm not talking about punishing students with grades for homework that was not completed, all that kind of thing. But I do think it's important that if we say that a learning activity is helpful and important to the student's learning and integral to the course, then why aren't we expecting them to finish those learning activities? So I hope that makes sense. That would be my response here to Matthew, who is complaining about homework at school. I'd like to know how old his child is. I think that matters. And for the most part, when I think about primary years, let's say K to 4, K to 3, K to 4, to grade 4, fourth grade, I would hope that most of the learning is happening only at school. But again, like I said, once students get into those middle and high school years, I think they're getting to that place. Personally, I think they're getting to that place where if they have not made great use of their class time, or for whatever reason, maybe they were highly invested but just weren't working efficiently during the class time, or paid too much attention to the small details, or maybe they're still mastering a concept, it's not a bad thing to finish it at home. Okay, moving on to one of my faves here. Let's make sure this is displaying properly. We've got Pav Wander sounding off on X. So a little bit of background. Oh, and I can see a couple of comments here coming in on the live broadcast. Erica Sandstrom says, love this, Tim. Thank you, Erica. I am year 33. Wow, Erica. All right, I would not have guessed. Amazing, and congratulations to you. I'm going to change the view of the display here. And let's see if this, let's go with this one. So my friend Pav Wander, and I can say friend, I've met her a couple of times in person, fantastic educator in the Toronto area. And she says, let me see here. Yes. Okay, I hope I am streaming the correct tab. She says, we kicked off our Thinking Classroom expectations today in class, spending a little extra time talking about the logic behind randomized groups. We then worked on a simple but ascending task. The engagement was off the charts and the math chatter continued at their tables. Let's blow that up here so you get a bit of a better look at students working around the classroom. So this is really, really cool stuff. And what Pav is talking about, if you're new to Building Thinking Classrooms by Dr. Peter Liljedahl, he's a big fan of this idea of reimagining the math classroom. He talks about defronting the room. You'll see in this video here, there's no real front, so to speak, because Pav isn't at the front of the room. She's not lecturing or demonstrating at this particular time, at least. And we've got students all around the room standing, which is great because we're increasing blood flow. They're also collaborating and communicating, as she mentioned, because they are working in groups. And they are working at vertical surfaces that not only Pav can see, but other groups can see as well. There are so many great things going on in this video. So Pav, thank you for sharing. And by the way, just as an aside, for educators like myself who love to take video or pictures of students learning, but are mindful of privacy restrictions, I think this is great because you have students so engaged. They're all looking at their non-permanent vertical surface, and none of them are looking at the phone or the camera, which is awesome. But thank you, Pav, for sharing from the classroom. She and Che, her partner at the Che and Pav Show podcast, they've done an amazing job of sharing out learning from their classroom so far this year. On to my friend Livia Chan. And if you're not connected with Livia Chan on X, she's another one to make sure you are connected to. She says, my daily goal is to make one thing in our school day a fun and memorable experience. Today, we practice the skills of cooperation, communication, perseverance, and teamwork by taking turns keeping the balloon up in the air. Balloon exercise. And here's a picture of the balloon with a great big smiley face. I love the simplicity of this, right? All she had to do was come up with a balloon. Now, she does teach primary students, I believe second grade. Livia, correct me if I have that wrong. But the point here is that through something pretty simple and a pretty simple activity, she could make that moment of the day pretty fun and pretty memorable, something that students will go home talking about and laughing about. And if you've read The Power of Moments, that book goes on at great length about how when we look back on let's say our sixth grade or our seventh grade experience, I'm talking about us now as educators, when we look back on those years, we actually don't remember the minutia of every single day. What our brains do is seize on to certain moments, certain memories, and we build a chronology or we build a narrative around those select moments, whether it was good or whether it was bad. And those are the things we continually go back to. So if you ask me about grade 6, I'm sort of drawing on the same 2 or 3 memories, moments. And that's what human beings do. So the application for us as teachers is, what about the moments that you and I are creating? Are we setting up a learning experience where every day is the same? Or are we surprising our students? Are we introducing memorable activities? And for these students, that's something that they will remember, I'm sure, for some time. Lots of laughter and fun. And Livia, I wonder how many of these balloons you have around, because sooner or later, I'm sure with that balloon getting that much contact, it's going to pop at some point. 2 more comments that I'd like to talk about. This one from Emily Paschall. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. I'll try to zoom in on her tweet, her post. I'm trying to adopt the new language of X. So we're dealing in posts now, not tweets anymore. But she says, finish this sentence. Effective instruction looks like. Effective instruction looks like. And by the way, if you are joining us and you have an answer to that question, put it in the comments. I'd love to throw it up on the screen. What does effective instruction look like for you? Well, here were some of the replies. I won't read all of this graphic here from Jason Kennedy, but he loves to share about Tier 1 instruction and learning. And he says, do you want to know if learning is happening in your classroom? Think about who is asking the questions, who is having a discussion, who is monitoring the learning, who is accessing tools to remediate, who is finding pathways to accelerate, who is assessing the performance. Really, who is engaged, who is active. And so he's always got some good challenging takes. Again, the question from Emily is, effective instruction looks like. What does effective instruction look like? Okay, let's keep going. I'm going to skip down to Courtney here. She says, kids learning. There are so many varieties, but the end result is always the same. It could look like a lecture, a project, hands-on activities. At the end of the day, if kids learned, it was effective. I love getting to see and learn in so many ways. I like that Courtney included lecture here, and it's not something that we encourage in our classrooms very much, but she's making a great point, and that is that kids can learn in many different ways. And sometimes we've dumped perhaps unnecessarily hard on lecturing, but people can learn from lecture, particularly in short bursts. Erica says student engagement and adds student excitement. So, again, to the question of effective instruction looks like, she's talking about engagement and excitement. Yes, if students are all in on an activity, they are going to be learning. Certainly, if that opportunity for learning is there, I agree. Great points, Erica. Let's go back to the feed here. And again, we're looking at a question from Emily who says, effective instruction looks like. AJ Buckner says, the learner being able to understand and independently applying the taught information. Okay, so that application, this applying word is really important. I like that. Jackie Hodelman says, students actively engaged in higher level thinking. So we have some depth of knowledge mentions here where the teacher is focused on learning and students are doing the thinking. Appropriately scaffolding while extending learning for our higher level learners and supporting students who haven't grasped the concepts. Nick says someone who will lead with empathy, listen, make it about the kids, be humble, and apologize. I like that. Now, maybe that's drifting away from learning just a little bit, or perhaps he might make the case we're talking about character learning in those situations when we're talking about teachers apologizing. But I think that's so important because if you've taught in the classroom for very long, you've probably made mistakes and you haven't kept your word, or you've responded unnecessarily harshly, or hey, we're all human, we make those mistakes. But I think apologizing in front of students is so helpful and can be so powerful. They need to see it modeled effectively. And I tell students when I talk to them in my office about how an apology names the problem, owns the problem, expresses what we could have done differently, makes a commitment for change going forward, and asks for forgiveness. And I think when we do those things, when we walk through all of that, that takes a lot of humility. But if we're willing to, students stand to learn a lot. Teamwork and problem solving led by the students. That's from Manor Intermediate. That sounds like a school account, but I love these pictures. I'm not sure what's happening here. Let's zoom in on this one if we can. Maybe I need to zoom out a little bit. So they are, I don't know what they have there in the middle, but there is definitely teamwork of some kind happening. So thank you for that, Manor Intermediate. I like that. Teamwork and problem solving led by students. Well done. Let's get one or two more answers. Student engagement and enthusiasm, just as Erica said, and Will says teacher and students engaged. Someone else doing it. Not sure about that one. Great answers, great ideas there to the question of effective instruction looks like. My last stop, I'd like to come on over to Tyler Rablin. And if you are on X as a teacher, he is a must follow. I'll zoom in on his account here. He's at Mr_Rablin. And he asks, how am I offering multiple and varied opportunities for kids to show me what they know? When I started asking that question, important things started changing in my assessment practice. I like this idea because number one, I think all of us have heard this question or questions like it. If you've been around in education, this is not a brand new, shocking idea. I hear UDL in this question and different opportunities for kids to not only learn, but represent their learning. But it takes me back to a dear colleague, Livia Chan, who I remember seeing on her screen a couple of learning targets and then a blank space. And she turned to students and said, how do you think you can demonstrate evidence of learning against these learning targets? And I like the level of ownership there when we say to students, here is what we want to learn. How are you going to demonstrate it? What kinds of activities could we use? Now, sometimes students may not give us the greatest insights in terms of how to learn that information or how to master those new skills. But in terms of demonstrating evidence of their learning, representing their learning, I think often they will come up with some pretty good ideas that we can apply. And as many times as we can, those are going with the student initiated suggestions is going to bring up the interest and the engagement and the ownership in your classroom. So how am I offering multiple and varied opportunities for kids to show me what they know? Maybe a follow-up question or an additional question would be, how am I giving students the opportunity to select their own opportunities or to select their own means of representation of learning, if that makes sense? Let's just take a quick look at some of the replies. Fab asks, how did you put that into practice? Tyler responds, it really just forced me to be more clear about the exact things I wanted students to learn and then think about how they could demonstrate it. My previous approach was essentially to focus on the content I was giving them and then develop one major assessment to check that. Yes. Nope, we don't want offensive replies. Okay. Someone's just putting an ad there. Kelly says, today we answered questions about ourselves and then made connections by finding out what we have in common and physically linking our hexagons together. Every single student found something in common with at least one other person in their class. I love this activity. I don't know how closely I can zoom in here, but I've seen this around on X before. I don't know if I'll be able to pick up any of the actual writing here. But basically, students are given these hexagons, and on the hexagons, they are writing, I believe it's their interests, passions, things about them. And then this teacher has obviously asked students to go around the room and connect, not go around the room, but go to their neighbors and connect their hexagons with others who share the same interests and passions. I wonder, maybe a question I would put to this teacher is, what about the risk of a student not finding anyone with a shared passion or interest? What would you do in that situation? For example, I wouldn't want all of these hexagons to form or to join and then have one or two left out in the cold. Hopefully that would never take place. But what a beautiful illustration of our commonalities. So that's a worthwhile post. Thank you, Kelly, for that. And the Mad Woman in the Classroom says, I actually really love my classroom this year. As the youth say, it's a vibe. Awesome. Looks like a great room, and I like the learning space. Lots of flexible options. And are those wheels on the bottom of the chairs? I believe they are. Excuse me. We are coming to the end of our time. Let's see if we have any more any more responses. Dory says, me, an elementary teacher, 2 weeks into the school year. And this person is giving a thumbs up. Okay, I think we're now firmly into just random teacher posts here. I think we've left Tyler's question. So I'll go back to Tyler's question. How am I offering multiple and varied opportunities for kids to show me what they know? So that's a great note to end on. Thank you to Tyler for that. And again, here's Tyler's profile. If you're not following him on X, make sure you do so. He is an ELA teacher, writer, and assessment EdTech consultant. I'm happiest outside. And yes, he's a man after my own heart, gets outside into the hiking, into the mountains of Washington quite a bit. Well, let's go back to the main frame here, and I'm going to wrap up this first edition of Saturday Morning Teacher Talk. But teachers, I just wanted to connect with you in more of a live stream format and get to know you. And so, before I wrap up here, Erica has added a few more comments. She says, wow, that's perfect, Tim. Can you make a poster of that? Erica, DM me to let me know exactly which graphic you're referring to there. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn. I'll have to go back in the tape and see exactly which one you were talking about. And you also added here authentic assessments. So many fun ways to share their learning. Yes, awesome. So, like I said, teachers, it's been a joy to connect with you in this live format, wherever you're catching me. Thank you for supporting my work at Teachers on Fire. I'm excited to get back into the saddle and create more blog posts and YouTube videos that will hopefully warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your professional practice. Join me here next week. Let's make this a bit of a meeting if you can, if it works for your schedule. Again, it's starting at 8:30 Pacific, 11:30 Eastern. Grab a cup of coffee and let's talk about education for a few minutes. You are not alone. You're surrounded by teachers from literally around the world who are keen on learning and keen on mastering their craft. And so if you do feel alone in your school, community, or environment, I've got words of hope for you. And that is that there are others just like you seeking to learn and grow. Join us here next week. And until next time, take care, share an encouraging message to lift up a colleague, and keep that fire for learning burning bright. Bye-bye.